On one morning, Nurse Jan, they do the chemo at about 4:30 in the morning. She came in and started hanging it. And I just said, no, I'm done. I am done. I just couldn't do it. I was done. And I remember Jan just sat with me like, you've got to do this. And I remember saying, why? Why do I have to? Because it's too hard. And we talked it through, but ultimately she kind of pointed towards the pictures and she said, look at those two babies. And look at that dog. He's huge.
Welcome to Stories of Hope in Hard Times, the show that explores how people endure and even thrive in difficult times, all with God's help. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson. Join me on a journey to find inspiring stories of hope and wisdom learned in life's hardest moments.
My guest today lives in San Antonio, Texas, with her husband, 2 children, and her 2 dogs. After attending Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, she moved to New York, where she worked for NBC Sports. After 2 years of living and working in the city, she decided to pursue her dream of becoming a surgeon. And so she applied and was accepted to a post-baccalaureate medical school program at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. After just 1 year of medical school, she received the news that changed her life forever. Routine blood work revealed she had an incurable, highly aggressive, stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was just 27 years old. I'm pleased to present Caroline Rose. Caroline, are you ready to share your story of hope?
I'm ready. Thank you for
Awesome.
having me.
Let's do this. Okay, one of the funny facts about you is your brother ended up being your bone marrow transplant. And you now have some of his personality traits. Why don't you tell me about that? It's just so unique and funny to me.
Wildest thing. And my husband still is kind of in shock. My brother and I are very different. He's 3.5 years older. And growing up, we were close, but I pushed his buttons and he pushed mine. And I remember the day that he got the news that he was a perfect match for the bone marrow. And he called me and said, well, I guess you're not adopted after all, because he'd always joke with me, like, we could not possibly be related, And so, and it's actually pretty unusual for a sibling or a family member to be a match. And they match it on a scale of 1 to 10. And I think you have to be a 6 or 7 to be considered a match. But my brother was a 10. He was a perfect match. So he was my donor for both of my bone marrow transplants. And we kind of thought it was coincidental at first, but I really have sort of, adopted, I guess, through his immune system, these personality traits and these things I'll say or do. And my husband's close to my brother and knows him well. And he looks at me like, I married your brother. It's the funniest thing. And so it's been, it really, I have his allergies. I have,
And you didn't used to before, right?
No,
That's so
not
interesting.
At all. Even my kids notice it. They adore my brother. I mean, we've been pretty open with them and hopefully in an age appropriate way of sort of what, health wise I've gone through. And they know that their uncle saved their mom's life. So, they think that's super cool and, wow. And so they adore him. But they will even say things at times like, gosh, Mom, you're so much like Uncle Chad. Well, yes. I don't know if that's good or bad, but yes. But no, it really is. It really is true.
Oh my goodness. That is awesome. That's really, really fun. Now we're going to go back in time to your life to just a complete switch when you went from being super active. It says you've run 7 marathons. You were planning on climbing Mount Kilimanjaro to a day when everything changed. Why don't you talk me through where you were and that day of change?
Sure. Yeah. I was in a med school program out at USC in Los Angeles, and it was my first year. So I like to say I was the type A plus plus. I was regimented. I was no fun to be around. I'd get up at 4:30. I'd be at the gym at 5 a.m. when they opened. I wanted the same treadmill. I mean, it was, then I'd get to campus and study. And that was sort of my life. And I was a big runner. I'd done Boston, New York. I'd just done my 7th marathon, which was San Diego, got my fastest time, then did the LA triathlon. And then my brother called and said, "Hey, do you want to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa over Christmas?" It gave me about 3-4 months to train. And I said, absolutely. So I was actually training to climb the mountain. And I knew I had endurance, but I didn't have this strength. I didn't have, the muscular strength to carry, a pack up a mountain. Right. So I'd been working out with I think it was a 45-pound weighted vest. And I thought, we lived in Santa Monica at the time, and there was they called the Santa Monica stairs. And I can't remember how many stairs, but I mean, it is a long staircase. So everyone goes, up, down, up, down. So I did this with this weighted vest. And pretty quickly, I noticed what I thought was muscle forming. My neck was bigger. I'd put deodorant on and really feel this new, what I thought was muscle under my arm. And I was proud of this. I was, getting results very quickly. So I flew back to my hometown of San Antonio over Thanksgiving. And my dad is a doctor. So he had lined up some blood work before we got the vaccinations that you get, a month before Africa.
Right.
So it was 2 days before Thanksgiving. And I went in that morning and did blood work in his office. So he got the results pretty quickly. And he called and said, "Hey, there was a mistake. Run on back and let's do it again." Went back, did it again, same results. And he called, and he's a surgeon, and I've never, ever had him cancel a surgery, ever. My brother and I still are amazed he canceled surgery. He said, "Canceled a surgery. You need to come meet me in Dr. So-and-so's office right now."
Wow.
So I think it was the fact that he canceled the surgery that really got my attention. Because to be clear, I had never had a symptom. I never once had any symptom. And I absolutely will still say I was in the best shape of my life. I mean, that day I've never been, quote unquote, it's really ironic, healthier or stronger. And I didn't look sick. Nothing about me looked that way, felt that way. So went to that doctor's office, and he looked at me, and just with his trained eye, he was a hematologist. He was a blood cancer, and he looked at me and said, "How long have those lumps been in your neck?" And I was the biggest compliment. I just, well, thank you. I thought he was complimenting my training, my muscle, and they were not muscles, which I quickly realized. They were the lymph nodes, and they had just grown and grown and grown. And the muscle that I thought was under my arm were actually more lymph nodes. So when he looked at me, he pretty quickly knew. I think he did a 2-minute physical exam and said, "Come into my office. We need to talk." And, just looked at us and said, "I think this is lymphoma." No clue what that was, had not covered that in med school, just was complete disbelief because, again, I didn't have a symptom, didn't add up, it didn't make sense. So the next morning, the day before Thanksgiving, I went in that morning, and a general surgeon removed a lymph node at the bottom of my neck. And that was what they did the biopsy on that afternoon. And we got the results, I think, by 3:00 that afternoon. We knew it was a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We knew that it was I think it was a B cell. I can't even remember the full name of it. But what we didn't know was how widespread it was. So we had to go. We got through Thanksgiving. That next Monday morning, I was at MD Anderson, walking in as this, I always say I walked in that morning, one person, and left, a cancer patient. And that was the day that I met my doctor, and she ordered all the stage testing, which is, you go through the PET scans, the CT scans, bone marrow biopsy, numerous tests to sort of just determine what is this, where is this, and what are we dealing with.
Right.
So a week later, I met with her again. And that's when she just said, hey, this is everywhere. This is in your stomach, your spleen, and it's in your bone marrow, which is what categorized it as stage 4. And that, I think, more so than the diagnosis itself, was just impossible to fathom. It was just, I think I'd convinced myself, okay, maybe I've got some lymph nodes that need some treating, but to realize that it had just, taken over my body without my knowledge was just, I felt betrayed by my body in a way. I felt like, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me a heads up? And, 17 years later, I look back on that day and I think my body had tried to tell me. I just was so disconnected. My mind and my body were not one. My mind told my body what to do, when to do, how hard to do it. And I wasn't listening at all. And so it was so aggressive that we started chemo the next day. I went inpatient and started.
What?
And I remember the only question we had, I said, well, what about fertility? I'm 27 years old. I don't know what's going to happen, but is this going to affect fertility? And they just said, it probably, but we cannot worry about that right now because we just have to save your life. And we can treat you, but we cannot cure you. There's no cure for this. So our goal is to get you in remission. But just know when you get there, that's going to be kind of the beginning of waiting until it comes back. And then the question was, well, what happens when it comes back? And that's when they said, you know what, we will figure that out when we get there. And that, on top of everything else, was just the, I wanted a plan. I wanted a goal. I was very goal, and not having that goal of how do I fix it? How do I do that? How do I win? That was a very, very difficult thing for me to accept and comprehend, because it's like, well, then why am I going to do this? It was no doubt a shock. And it was a taking me off a life path that I was so firmly implanted in, and something that I so thought was the right thing. And I always say it was like the first time God kind of hit me over the head with a sledgehammer, like, hey, we're not going to go down that path. We're going to go this way. And I'm hard headed. And it's like, no, I don't want to go that way. But I think he knew that it would take something that severe to get me to look up and sort of consider going a different route.
Yeah. No, I know. I felt that same way when our first son was diagnosed with autism. It was that hit me on the head. What?
Yeah.
It's
right.
like life changing.
That hard?
Oh,
yeah. Oh,
what do you mean?
Yeah. Right.
Oh my goodness. I totally, I know how that feels. It's so disorienting, especially when you expect that, okay, this is my life. It's been this way. It's going to keep going this way. And all of a sudden God just sends you off on a detour and you're just like, wait a second.
Right.
This is not in my plan.
Right. And very humbling and scary. And
Yes.
once you realize we really don't have the control we thought we did, it's that part sticks with you forever. Once you realize that, you always know that.
Yes.
And it can cause a little fear and anxiety. But I think the more we sit in it and live in it and trust him, the more we realize it's actually kind of cool to not have that control, because it takes a lot of pressure off of us. We kind of just have to learn to trust and follow as best we can. It's not always easy, but it's a very comforting feeling once you practice it a while.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's sad to say that it takes something so life-changing as cancer to sometimes hit us over the head and say, wrong direction, you need to learn a few lessons.
Right.
Which there are different ways we could learn these life lessons, but sometimes there's no other way versus instead, you got to go through it.
That's right.
So why don't you take me through what this looked like for you and I want to call it living in limbo phase that you went through afterwards. Talk to me through that as well.
After I was first diagnosed, I remember coming back after meeting the doctor that day. I came home and my uncle was involved with MD Anderson at the time. And I was staying at their house in Houston. And I remember him coming in because I was so upset because I said, I don't understand the point of fighting. I know I want to live and I know this is what I have to do, but why am I going to put myself through all this if ultimately it's just going to come back and I'm going to have to do all this again? And I don't even know if there's going to be a better option. I mean, I was just in this tailspin and, my uncle, he's not a man of many words. And I know he's very wise, but I'm always just been a little bit in awe of him. And he came in and it's funny because of all people to comfort me, he was the, last person I'd expect to walk in. But he said, listen, I've just been in these meetings, MD Anderson. I was there last week and I'm meeting with these researchers and these doctors, and I'm hearing all of this that's in the pipeline, everything they're working on and studying and researching and where all this funding is going. And it may not be specifically to your disease, but what I know is there is so much happening out there across the board that your goal right now needs to be to just buy time, because when this comes back, there will be another option. And that may not be the magic bullet, but get through that. And then if you need it again, there will be, so it kind of switched this mindset from I want to fix, I want to cure, I want to do this now, to just this, I have to trust and just buy time, and I think that applies to so many situations and pretty much any health issue really that we have to manage or live with. And it's not ideal and it's not easy, but instead of, if we can just sort of do what we have to do to live another day and just keep doing that, who knows what's going to come out and who knows what treatment options available and what we're going to learn. And I think that for me was the biggest switch that I needed. And that's sort of how I approached it. So when I went into remission the first time, that was really difficult because I wasn't A++. I was maybe back to like a normal A. I mean, it took a little of the edge off, but I was still pretty. And my husband and I got married and then moved to Santa Monica, or moved back to Santa Monica. And I was in remission about 8 months, and I couldn't go back to school because I was still doing maintenance treatments.
Sure.
And I couldn't go back to my job that I had before because, again, I would need too much time off. So I didn't know what to do with myself. And
all of a sudden you went from full schedule medical student to what do I do? How do I fill my time? What do I do? So what did you do?
100%. And I couldn't run. I could run a little bit, but not what I could. So what I did, and I swear this was 1,000% a God thing, because I rescued a dog, and I've always loved animals, but we searched for a while for this little cottage that we lived in Santa Monica. And I was terrified of our landlord. He was from New Jersey and just very, intense, shall we say. And at the top of our lease in big, bold letters, all caps, was no dogs allowed. I think he'd been, later found out he'd been attacked by a dog as a child and just was not, because he visited his properties often, very involved, did not want a dog. So one day I will never know why, I just Google searched, rescue dogs, Los Angeles. And this picture of this dog popped up. He was a Great Dane Lab mix, 11 months old, been horrifically abused, couldn't walk, needed reconstructive surgery. I called, and a couple hours later brought him home. And my husband just was like, Caroline, this dog is 111 pounds, is emaciated, how are we going to hide this dog? And it made no sense. And this dog did not trust anyone. This dog was broken. This dog needed full-time care. And I just, that's why I say it was such a God thing, because I just was terrified and I doubted myself, but I knew I had to bring this dog home. And took about 2 weeks, and I was in the kitchen cooking steaks, and he kind of he got out of his corner because he'd been hiding in his corner for 2 weeks, and he kind of walked in, and I gave him a bite of steak, and that was it. That
you can buy my affection with food.
and his name was Riley. He came with the name Riley, and our last name is Rose. So it was Riley Rose. And this dog, he became my everything. My job, my time was filled by rehabilitating this dog. So we would take him swimming, and I was determined to do something besides the surgery that he needed. And it worked. We went to the dog park, is where I met my friends that are still some of my closest friends today. And this dog became my companion. He became my project. He became my source of comfort. And I think I always say, I healed him. It's true, especially those first 8 months. But then as soon as I was re-diagnosed, he then started to heal me. And that was sort of our journey. The rest of his life was, he was giving it all back to me.
Wow. That is powerful. It's interesting. I've talked to people on the show before about people coming in and being a godsend in their lives, but we've never dove in and talked about how God sometimes sends animals into our lives.
I think for me, I'm so blessed. I mean, I have such an incredible husband, and my parents, my brother, my aunts and uncles and cousins. I mean, we have a really beyond amazing family. And I think sometimes when I talk about Riley, I know they know, but I almost want to say, like, it was these people, these humans were so incredible. I think for me, I saw what my diagnosis did to them, and I saw the fear, and I saw the tears behind closed doors that they tried to hide. And it killed me. I'm a people pleaser. I'm sensitive. I'm an empath. I took on their emotions.
Right.
So my solution was, I'm okay, guys. I feel fine. I am going to be okay. And they weren't asking me to do that. I did that because I didn't want them to hurt, and I didn't want them to worry. So I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then when Riley came into my life, and when I was re-diagnosed for the second time, I realized I craved him, but I didn't know why. And it took years for me to really understand I didn't have to be okay around him. I could literally fold my body on top of his, and he just gave to me. And he didn't need anything except just my presence. And I say, and then as I was diagnosed for the third time, and it went on, it was even more so once I became a mom. I never want my kids to worry. So you always try to put on a brave face, but I didn't have to with him. And I needed that. I needed somebody that I could just let go around. And it's like he filled in those cracks that it was like the glue that kept it all together for me.
And God knew exactly what you needed, even though it was a huge dog.
I mean, I think his happy weight was 140. And
my goodness.
He actually became a service dog. I guess the last 5 years of his life, he was certified. And so he would fly on the airplanes with us. And my brother was always thinking, Caroline, you're taking 140 pounds. You're taking a small pony on the plane. I know I am, but I'm doing it. I mean, that poor dog had more airline miles. It was hysterical. He went to Disneyland with us. I mean, the stories, it really was amazing.
Oh my goodness. That is that's fun. And it's interesting. So I love that you were able to be raw and real. And I think that is an important point whenever we're struggling, that there is someone or some animal that we can talk to. Obviously, God is a good person, but sometimes you need some of that physical touch, and you got that through Riley. And that's beautiful that
100%. Yeah.
That is one of the ways you got it. It's so incredible.
Someone once, they said, dog is God spelled backwards. And I'd never thought of that. And I thought, I deeply believe God sends angels, and sometimes I think Riley wasn't real, but it almost connected me to God more. I know this sounds crazy because Riley's love was so different, and it was so uncomplicated, and it was so big and consistent and loyal that it always reminded me of God's love. It was it almost kept me looking up. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it was just so pure that so they pointed that out, I thought, oh, that's right. There is something to that. I think God knew exactly what he was doing when he did that. Yeah.
Yes. I love that. Now,
Mm.
you were able to have children
Yes,
before you had the cancer come back a third time.
I
Why
did.
don't you talk me
Right.
through that journey? Because that was a journey in
Yeah.
and of itself.
It was a
And
journey. Yeah. After my first diagnosis, we were married, and then I think one of the first things we did is we froze our embryos. So we had met a doctor in downtown Los Angeles, fertility doctor, he was just phenomenal. And he said, look, I don't know what I can do, but I can try. So let's freeze your embryos, because at this point, we knew when the cancer came back, we knew the treatment was going to be a bone marrow transplant. So fertility post, what I'd gone through already was possible, questionable, but possible. Post transplant, I had been told that it was not possible. So the
Gotcha.
thought was, let's go on and freeze your embryos. Let's have those. So if you have to do a transplant sooner rather than later, we still have this to go back to. So that's what we did. And that's exactly what happened. We, was then re-diagnosed, went through my first bone marrow transplant. I think that was in July 2006. And I think I was pregnant with my daughter in April of 2007. I want to say that's right.
Wow.
And we had transferred 2 embryos, and they actually both took. So it was, my daughter was a twin, and we lost her brother, about 24 weeks into the pregnancy. So his heart stopped beating, and we don't know why, but one theory is my first transplant, I didn't convert all the way to my brother. It was kind of a 50-50, and we have different blood types, which is wild, even though he's a perfect marrow match. So I had half of his blood, half of mine, and they are thinking maybe there was some interference with the electrical current of his heart with the contrasting blood types. Because after Ellie's twin, we lost 3 more babies the same way, not quite as far along, but it created this, we don't know why. And I don't know if we'll ever know why. It could just be, they just weren't strong enough. Maybe the eggs weren't strong. We're not sure, but we lost her brother, and he was the twin on top. She was on bottom. So she was born and he was born. And she was born 6 weeks early, because actually his fluid started leaking. They were worried it would infect her sac. And the NICU team had come in and said, hey, she's going to be here for a while. You just need to know. And that little girl was born, and I think she was out of the hospital before I was. I mean, she was just the strongest little thing. And she is just, I tear up. She's such a miracle. And then we had some other experiences where we lost some babies. And I think at that point, my husband and I just said, we can't go through this anymore. We're so blessed to have Ellie. Are we asking too much? Are we pushing our luck? So we actually stopped trying. We said, we are just going to let this be. And I got pregnant naturally.
Wow.
And that is my son. He was born, and he is healthy as can be. He is another miracle. Actually, I think I was 35 weeks at my OB, and they do the stress test where they listen to the heartbeat.
Yes.
And his heartbeat was double what it should have been. So we went straight to the hospital. They did a very, very, very fast C-section, because they did the ultrasound. He was in heart failure. You could see the fluid around his heart. And his first EKG was abnormal. And then I think 24 hours later, they did another. It was normal. And it's been normal ever since. And he is as healthy as can be. And again, we don't know why, but we caught it. And he was able to sort of, be born. And they are so close, those two. And they are every parent thinks their kids are the best. And I am not, but they are the coolest little kids. They're just sympathetic to me. If people talk to me about fertility and whatnot, it's like, listen, never say never.
Mm.
Don't ever say never. And that is no guarantee that anything is going to happen. But I just know what I was told and I know what happened. And Tommy, my son, was written up in some medical journals. They called and asked, they said, hey, this is the second reported case of a natural pregnancy post the type of transplant that I had. Are you okay if we share this? And I said, hell yes, I am. This gives people hope. This gives people, listen, I don't know if it's going to happen, but it's possible.
Right.
And it's like, if you don't have hope, what's the point? You've got to have that hope and hold on to that. And I hope, and I believe that's what that has hopefully done for one person, at least one person.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, your story is such a story of hope that miracles happen. And sometimes we just have to be patient and wait for the right treatment to come down the pipeline, as you say.
Yeah.
Wait for the right specialist to come along in your life. Wait for God to give you that baby.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a lot of waiting involved with miracles, right?
A lot of miracles. Yes, a lot of waiting. A lot of waiting.
Oh my goodness. That's awesome. We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, I'm going to have Caroline tell us a little bit more about this third bout with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, what made this time different, and why it was so much more the worth fighting for. Stay tuned. Hi, this is Tamara K. Anderson, and I want to share something special with you. When our son Nathan was diagnosed with autism, I felt like the life we had expected for him was ripped away, and with it, my own heart shattered as well. It's very common for families to feel anger, pain, confusion, and anxiety when a child is diagnosed. This is where my book, Normal for Me, comes into play. It shares my story of learning to replace my pain with acceptance, peace, joy, and hope. Normal for Me has helped change many lives, and I'd like to give this book to as many families as possible. We've put together something I think is really special. My friends and listeners can order copies of my book at a significantly discounted price, and we will send them to families who have just had a child diagnosed with autism or another special needs diagnosis. We will put your name inside the cover so they will know someone out there loves them and wants to help. I will also sign each copy. You can order as little as one or as many as hundreds to be shared with others. So go to my website, tamarakanderson.com, and visit the store section for more information and to place your order. You can bless the lives of many families by sending them hope, love, and peace. Check it out today at tamarakanderson.com and help me spread hope to the world. And we're back. I've been talking to Caroline Rose, author, mother, dog lover, and cancer patient. We have talked about her 2 bouts with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and we are just getting ready to dive into her 3rd bout. Let's talk about your 3rd relapse.
Yeah.
Because at this point it was different. You had those 2 babies.
Yeah.
They were young. How old were they when you had your 3rd relapse?
They were 5 weeks and 2.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah. Elliot turned 2. She was 2 years, 1 month, and Tommy was 5 weeks.
Wow. And how did you find out that you had relapsed?
Well, I'd realized after my first 2 diagnoses, I'd realized what to look for. I'd realized the raised lymph nodes, where they tended to appear. And the very visible were the groin area, sort of on the underwear line in the front. They were just very, the first 2 diagnoses, they were just almost like acorns under the skin. Very pronounced, very obvious. When I was pregnant with Tommy, they don't scan you, obviously, and you don't have, they can do blood work, but so I'd had back pain during that pregnancy, pretty horrific back pain, which is very natural with a pregnancy, very normal, nothing to worry about. And as my tummy started to kind of fade a little bit, 5 weeks after he was born, I happened to glance in the mirror and I saw the lymph nodes that I couldn't have, had been hidden by this tummy. and they were very, very pronounced.
Oh, no.
And I knew. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind. And I'll never forget where I was. And I emailed my oncologist in Los Angeles. He followed me locally. And I just said, I need to come see you right now. And I knew he was in clinic. It was a Thursday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I just went straight out to him. He did a CT scan. And the next day called and said, hey, it's back, and it wrapped around your spine, which was the back pain I'd been feeling. And the worry was it was starting to infuse into my spinal cord and fluid, I guess. And I will say that on one level, I really, really in my heart believed I was cured. I really believed that getting my brother's stem cells, going through the bone marrow transplant, I really believed that was the cure, because the transplant, they call it a potentially curative option. And I'd done so well post-transplant. I didn't have any side effects. I felt like me again. I felt like I was back to this little calmer, happy life. And now as a mom, and I guess in a way it was like, I felt like I'd learned my lesson. I felt like I was on a path that God wanted me on. It didn't make sense to me. And then, you think, I've got a 5-week-old and a 2-year-old at home. Like, I can't deal with this right now. I mean, I cannot, it was devastating on every level, to the point where I couldn't, honestly, it was like I had to, distance myself from the truth, because it was too much. It was too terrifying, and these babies needed me, and they needed their mom, and I needed them. And we'd gone through so much, and these miracle babies were here. And, I couldn't process it. It absolutely gutted me. So we started treatment we flew back to MD Anderson. We got our plan within, I think, a matter of days. And I did chemo in Los Angeles for, I think, four-ish months. I can't remember exactly. And I was very, very sick with that. I was very, very, very sick with that. We hired a nanny, which I never thought I'd do, never wanted to do, ever wanted to do. We joke, I think we interviewed 32, and I just, nope. And my mom had come out, and my husband were like, Caroline, you got to pick someone, I'm like, they are not taking care of my babies. I am taking care of my babies,
Mm-hmm.
But I think my husband, it was wearing on him. He was trying to be dad to two, a newborn and a 2-year-old, and then trying to be at the hospital with me. And I just knew it was not right. And I prayed about it a lot. And one day, I think it was number 33, she pulled up, and in her little red car, as we call it. And I remember she got out, and I was sitting on the couch looking out the window, and I looked at Tom and I said, I like her. And my husband said, she's hired. Even better, And she slowly walked up, and I remember Riley, our dog, was by the front door, and she opened the door. And I'll never forget, she looked at Riley and she said, hello, senor, and acknowledged Riley. And I thought, oh yeah, this is it. She's my angel. And she never tried to take Tommy, my baby, out of my arms, like she didn't want to show me how great she was with kids. She just, and so her name was Frances. We nicknamed her Boomba. And she was with us 10 years until she retired. And we talked to her probably once a week, and she comes to visit, and she was my angel. And I still say, you're not real. You are an angel. I think I'm going to hug you and you're going to turn into stardust. Like she became the kid's second mom, which she saved us. And listen, there were times I resented her for that. There were times that after being in the hospital so many weeks at a time, my kids wanted her. They didn't want me. When Tommy was 6 months old, and I think I'd been in the hospital 2 months, and I got home and he was terrified of me. I didn't have hair, and I had these tubes coming out, and he just wanted Frances, and it ripped my heart out. But I also knew that they loved her, and she loved them. She lived with us. She did everything for us. And I think that for me, that third diagnosis, having to give up control again and trust, that knocked me into if I was type A++ before, now I'm like a type D. Like now I'm just like, whatever, like I read somewhere the other day, this author that I love, she said she has two sets of prayers that she'll use. One is in the morning, she says, help. And at the end of the day, her prayer is thank you. Mm-hmm. And on other days, her morning prayer is whatever. And the end of the day is, oh, well, and it's sort of this, like, it just sums it up of this, and that's kind of what it was. It was like either help and thank you or whatever. Oh, well, because I had to let it all go, because that was the diagnosis that I almost didn't make it through. I mean, I hit my rock bottom, the pain, the physical pain, the fear, you name it. I mean, they had to hit me so much harder because we'd already tried this and it hadn't worked. Mm. And, my uncle's words came back because he was true. There was a new clinical trial that was happening. There were 68 patients. My doctor got me in as number 66. Wow. There was a 40% mortality rate, but it was really our only option. And, I signed my life away before I went in. Well, before I started all of the chemo, it was kind of a whole package. And it was, I thought I knew what I was getting myself into. I'd done this before. It wasn't even close. Wow. And my brother.
Can I ask you a question about that? Course. Because you talk about it was so much harder and you had to really battle back. Mm-hmm. What did you cling to in those darkest moments? What made you keep fighting? What made you keep going when you were at rock bottom?
I think that I've had this question often, and I think about this a lot. I remember in the hospital, I'd always taken one of the big canvas photos. I had one of the kids, and I had one of the kids in Riley. Mm. And before I left for the hospital for the big transplant, where I kind of knew I was going to be going in for a very long time, and I didn't know if I was coming back, I remember, it was almost like I was trying to distance myself emotionally from the kids a little bit, because it was this, I didn't mean to, but it was almost this subconscious way of sort of like, well, if they lose me, it'll be easier for them. And if I don't come, it was almost this like trying to make it hurt less way. Mm-hmm. And with Riley, I didn't have to do that again, because it's an animal, at the end of the day. And I knew he was there with the kids and they loved him. And I that comforted me a lot. And I think there was a moment they did part of this clinical trial, which was counterintuitive, but they did chemo after the transplant as well. They gave me a few rest days and then did chemo. Wow. That was what really hit. That's where I really hit the bottom. That's where I said, on one morning, Nurse Jan, I'll never forget Jan. She came in. They do the chemo at about 4:30 in the morning so that it's done by the time the doctors come through and make their rounds. And she brought it in, and she's in her space suit because the chemo is so strong that if it touched her hand, it would burn the skin through. And so wow. They're completely. It looks like I'm an Ebola patient. Like it really, and she came in and started hanging it. And I just said, no, I'm done. I am done. I had holes that had burned through my esophagus and was constantly throwing up blood, and because the blood was coming through and my whole body was in pain. And I just couldn't do it. I was done. And I remember Jan just sat with me like, you've got to do this. And I was saying, why? Why do I have to? Because it's too hard. Because I don't have it in me to come back. And we talked it through, but ultimately she kind of pointed towards those canvas prints, the pictures. And she said, look at those two babies and look at that dog. He's huge. And it really was this, I didn't want to. I'm going to be honest. I really did not want to. She said, just squeeze my hand. You don't even have to say the word. I just need you to squeeze my hand to let me know that you're in this. And it was the last thing I wanted to do because I didn't want to fight. I didn't have it in me to fight. So I didn't do it for me. I did it for them. And, ultimately I squeezed her hand. And the funny thing is she was going to hang that bag no matter what, even if they did knock me out to hang that bag. But I think Jan knew that there was such an emotional component to healing and to fighting and to surviving that she didn't want to do it to me. She wanted me to be actively fighting as well, because that's what heals, that's what gives people a fighting chance, really. She needed me to tell myself and to recommit to doing it. And that respect and that kindness she gave me, even though, it was the most powerful moment for me. And it really was that turning point of, okay, I guess I'm in it. It was that moment. And
Wow.
many times after, I just, damn it, Jan. But we were already in it. We were doing it. And, but I think if I didn't have Ellie and Tommy at the time, I don't think I would have squeezed her hand, but I did. And I did it for them 100%.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And it's amazing the power of choice in our brains, in our souls, that even though it may be the hardest decision of our life, like it was for you, that choice, even though it's hard, I choose to live. Sorry.
Yeah.
It was powerful enough to pull you through that awful third round of battling this disease back. It's a miracle. It really is. You've shared some powerful lessons throughout your story. Hanging in there one more day, this choice of choosing to live, which is powerful. And sometimes you need to make it more than once. And at times when you don't want to, but you have a reason, you have a why to keep living, right?
Yeah.
Never giving up hope.
Right. Ever.
Oh my goodness. That is
Never.
so incredible. Now, let me ask you this. In one of your comments, you mentioned that hope, you said, never ever give up hope. Even when you think there is none, there always is. It just may not look the way we thought it would look.
Right.
Explain that last phrase to me, that sometimes hope doesn't look the way we thought it would look.
I'll give an example.
Yes.
That I think this is where I really, really realized this about hope. Because, I think sometimes if you talk about hope, people that have had a loss or a tragedy or trauma, I understand they're kind of rolling their eyes and saying, hope is just this shiny word. And if you want to think that, go ahead. But I've had and I understand that. I really do. My dad, as I mentioned, is a surgeon, and he had a twin brother. And I think it was last year before COVID, he was, his twin brother went into the ICU, and I was there with them and my cousins and my aunt, and it did not look good. And I remember sitting with them. I was up all night with them, and I listened to them, and I saw their tears, but I also saw this hope and this almost, this joy in thinking of when we get through this and when Dad comes home. And my dad came the next day, and I kind of pulled him aside and I said, Dad, look, you're a doctor. This is your twin brother. I need you to tell me, is he going to make it? Because it doesn't sound good. And my dad is very practical, and he's a brain surgeon. So it takes a lot to get his attention. There's not a lot that's really a big deal in terms of medical. And he did something very uncharacteristic for him. He just said, Caroline, you can never take hope away from someone. And that was so not him, because he's very analytical, black, white, you can never take hope away from someone. In retrospect, my dad knew his brother wasn't going to make it, and his brother passed away the next day. But I saw what my dad did. He didn't say to my aunt and my cousins, guys, you need to prepare yourself. He's not going to make it. And I think that's what my uncle's doctors had been trying to tell everybody in a very kind way.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad could have so easily gone in and said something similar and prepared them. I think deep down they knew their dad and husband, and they knew he wasn't going to make it, but they needed to hold on to that hope. And that doesn't mean there was a happy ending. It doesn't mean that they brought him out of the hospital and they're all home together. But when he passed, I've talked to them about this. It was a beautiful moment, and they were all there together. And the hope didn't ever leave them. It shifted, and then it turned into this, how do we hold on to that? And how do we hold on to him? And how do we honor him and his memory? And they never lost it. And their hope now is, my cousin just had a baby and they named him after my uncle. I hope this little boy grows up, and I hope he hears these stories about my dad, and I hope he knows what a kind man he was. And they still have hope. It's not hoping that my uncle will live, because he didn't. It's hoping for other things. Mm-hmm. And so when I say that, I don't mean that hope is going to guarantee a happy outcome. Hope is what keeps us going. And maybe, God has a plan. We don't know what his plan is. And it's not always what we want. Many times it's not what we want. So hope isn't saying, well, I want this outcome, and if I don't get it, then I'm out. It's just hoping to get to a place where we can sort of accept the situation and be okay, and then keep going. And because if we don't have that, why are we doing this? If we're just going to be, if we're going to throw our hands up and give up, why are we living? Because we can't fully live unless we hope. That's just what it is.
I love that. We're not really living unless we hope. That is true, because so much of life is what we look forward to. Yeah. And sometimes when someone we love passes away, perhaps that hope shifts to, I will see them again.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. And it's hard to hope, I think. It's hard because you're vulnerable, and being vulnerable is very scary. Very, very scary. And it's so much easier to put up a wall or a guard or pretend like we don't care, or pretend like, when you show yourself and when you have hope, that's giving emotion to it. Mm-hmm. And that we know we could get our hearts broken. We know we could be devastated, but we're still choosing to hope, and we're still choosing to show up, even though we know. And I think that is so incredibly courageous, maybe the most courageous thing we do.
You're right. You're absolutely right. It does take courage to have hope. Yeah. And to hope for outcomes that we, maybe are dependent on other people's choices, or something that God doesn't see is the right thing to happen in our lives. It's hard. It's really, really hard.
It is.
Oh my goodness. This has been so amazing to dive down deep and to hear these heart-wrenching stories, but to also come to understand a little bit more about what hope truly is, since that is, the focus of my podcast and the focus of what you do. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. You mentioned in your notes that one of the things that you would share as a tip to someone who is in either a cancer situation or a situation where they're struggling is to listen to your God voice, your intuition, or your gut.
Yeah.
Talk me through why you would share that tip with someone.
Mm-hmm. I think that before cancer, as I mentioned, I didn't really listen to my body. I kind of told my body what to do. I had a plan and I was going to do it. I didn't ask opinions. I didn't check in with myself. I just was going to do it. And I think that, when I was brought to my knees, when anyone's brought to their knees, I think we rely on our faith more than we do in a day-to-day. I think in a day-to-day, it's more of a, hey there, how you know, it's more of a conversation with God, at least for me. And it's more of a gratitude and a forgiveness. And when I'm really in a spot where I don't know what to do, or I don't even if it's a little decision, I don't know what to decide. I'm not sure. I think for me, a big part of prayer is asking to help me be quiet enough and still enough to just listen, because I call it my God voice, because it's almost like we all have the answers within us. And I think one of the biggest gifts I was given through cancer was realizing that we all have the answers. God gives us the answers, whether it's intuition, being, I call it the God voice, whatever it is. Just being able to listen. And, if people contact me and want advice or they have a relative that was diagnosed or they were diagnosed or whatever it is, always happy to talk about it. But I always start by saying, hey, listen, this was my journey. You are going to have your own. And if you want to ask questions, opinions, absolutely, to anyone, doctors, patients, other cancer survivors, but listen, in your gut, you are going to know the right decision for you because you have it. God's going to give it to you. It's there. And that to me was so powerful and comforting to be able to know we always have it and can rely on that.
Wow. I'm thinking back to you hiring your cute little nanny, how you just knew.
Yeah.
That was you using your God voice, your intuition, your gut. You're like, this is the one. I know it.
Well, and it's so funny. I've talked to her so many times about that. Like, we call her Boomba, Boomba, when you pulled up and it was like, and I've told her this story so many times. And one day I said, I'm curious, what did you think when you pulled up into our house? And because we lived in a little cottage in Pasadena, California at the time. And she said, oh, Miss Caroline, I got out and I said, oh, no, they cannot afford me. Okay, we had totally separate experiences. It was so funny.
Oh, how cute.
Yeah,
but it all worked out for the best.
It all worked out. But it's true. That's a perfect example of that. You're right.
Oh my goodness. No, I love that.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. You also mentioned a tip that you reemerge from your battle a changed person.
Yeah.
Tell me why that is and why the people around you also emerge from your battle changed and what you need to do to readjust to the change.
I know for me, and I assume for others who've gone through, I would say, trauma in general. I think that we go through it personally, and I think those around us go through it in their own way as well. I always say, you're put in the trenches and you have to kind of reemerge, right? And we have to claw our way out, right? I mean, it's like, it's messy and it's ugly and it's dirty, but you come through this. And I was, I don't know what the word is, upset or surprised or unprepared for the person that I was on the other side. And it was uncomfortable because I knew who I was before, but I didn't know who this new person was. But I knew it was a different person, and I knew I cared about different things. And it was new to me. So there was that, but then there was my husband, there were my friends, my parents, my brother, those that were close to me that went through it with me because they went in that same trench. And they went in it a little differently and got out of it a little bit differently, but we all went through it. So they were different as well. And, on the most casual level, the friendships, some were strengthened, some were lost, some came out of nowhere. And I think on the most intimate level, with your spouse or a sibling, I think just being aware that you're both a little different because you both experienced it. It wasn't just me, the patient, it was all of us. And giving us room to sort of figure out who we are and giving time and space for the relationship to sort of change as well. Because you don't want to, I think we tried to keep it in the same little groove it had always been in, but that groove no longer existed. So then what's the new groove? What's the new normal? And it was scary because it almost felt like, well, we're losing what we had. And we did lose it, but we created something so much more meaningful and beautiful and messy. But I think that's what we always were supposed to have. And again, that was sort of God's way of pushing us over to that place because it was more natural and it was more spiritual and it was more authentic, really. But we had to recognize it and allow it to happen. And again, same with family members, friendships, all of it. And again, that's vulnerable and scary because there were some really hard truths we all had to face. And I lost some relationships that were very special to me. But I think losing those made space and room to strengthen those that I had because they're just so much deeper and richer and more meaningful and beautiful now.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I think that when we go through trauma, that the things that are maybe not as important, they just tend to fall out of our lives. It just naturally happens because you just don't have time or energy
Right.
for the things that are truly unimportant and the things that you really need last and stay.
Yeah. It's almost like it's almost like holding on to it with a slippery grip. Like the stuff that doesn't matter, it's almost like even if you try, you just can't. It just you can't, because it's not, you're not meant to have that. And then the things that are, you can't not hold on to it,
Right.
It just becomes so clear.
Oh, so going through trauma can really help clarify for us the things that are most important.
I think so. I think that's one of those silver linings, I think there's a reason we go through it. Again, not to say that it's easy, but there's a lot of good.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I love that. Now, let me ask you, were there any favorite Bible verses that just became your mantra or that you loved through this whole process?
Yes. So this one was Romans 8:24 and 25. And it is, for in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience.
Tell me why that resonated with you.
I think it has been a struggle for me in the past. I think with faith, hope, whatever it may be that you can't see and it's not tangible and that I couldn't read about in a medical school book. There's no proof. There was no theory. There was no algorithm, it's a trust thing, right? You're trusting. And for me, that was hard. It was really hard. I think that when you're brought to your knees, right, you're in that place where you're thinking, you have to depend on something, right? And that's when I felt my faith strongest. And when I kind of reemerged in a different direction, a different person, a stronger person, for me, it was that hope, that faith, that God voice. That's what I held on to. And that's what I hold on to every single day. That's what I teach my kids to hold on to, And I think knowing that A, God's always there, B, God's never going to let us down, and C, he gives us that hope for a reason. I mean, I think ultimately it all comes from him. So call it what you want, hope, faith, whatever it is. You could argue it's the same thing because it's a gift and it keeps us going in the right direction because when we rely on hope and faith, we rely on that God voice and we rely on that trust and we kind of resign ourselves to the fact, like I was talking about earlier, takes the pressure off because he's in control. So if we can just learn to listen and to follow, it's kind of like, hey, he's got it. We're just gonna go along for the ride. And it does free us up a bit to enjoy the ride a bit, Again, not that it's easy, but it's beautiful. It's as beautiful as it is messy.
So true, right? It's as beautiful as it is messy. I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay. Resources. What are some of the books or people that kind of help, that you follow, that help you get through this, that you would recommend to others?
I think, Brene Brown, I adore her. She talks about vulnerability. It makes a lot of sense to me. And she's a Texan like I am. I love her grit and her humor, and it's relatable and understandable. I love Jen Hatmaker. She's a great church in Austin, and she's just, again, a Texan, and just her, the way she talks about faith, to me, it's just all about love and acceptance. And that's what I always go back to. I think sometimes the details of, what church believes what and this and that, at the end of the day, it's like, hey, it's really all the same thing. I love Chris Carr. I think I became very interested in nutrition and anti-cancer lifestyles, and there's such a huge amount of nutritional information out there, oftentimes contradicting each other. And I think I learned through her, just listen to what feels right to you. Again, go back to that inner wisdom, that God voice. And she just resonated with me. She actually lives with cancer, and she treats herself. There's not a treatment option. So she treats herself with food, and she's been able to keep her cancer in check. And so she lives with that fear and anxiety, but it's pretty beautiful to see the way that she has created this life that is just joyful and beautiful and honest as well.
Wonderful. And that's Chris Carr.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We will definitely link these people in the show notes so other people can find them as well, because that sounds amazing.
Great.
And people are going to want to connect with you. So how do they do that? So please give us your resource.
First, I would love that. Yeah. I send out, on average, a bi-monthly. I call them my hits of hope. And they're posts, and they're usually, hopefully a little inspiring. They can be funny. They can be more serious. It's sort of, all focused around hope. Sometimes I'll, talk about stories that I've heard, or friends, or things that have been impactful and relevant. So you can sign up on the website. And then my email's also on there. So
Tell us your website.
Yes. Well, it's dearrileyrose.com. So named it after my dog. I actually wrote a book, which will be coming out hopefully this year. So
yay!
Yeah. And it's titled Dear Riley Rose. So
wonderful. Oh my goodness. This has been so amazing. Caroline, thank you so much for being willing to dive deep with us and tell us about those moments when it was really hard and you had to make a choice and you chose life, because that inspires me and gives me hope.
I think it all goes back to, no matter what's happening in our lives or our world, there's always goodness, there's always joy, there's always hope. And sometimes we just have to look for it.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's show. If you like what you heard, subscribe so you can get your weekly dose of powerful stories of hope. I know there are many of you out there who are going through a hard time, and I hope you found useful things that you can apply to your own life in today's podcast. If you would like to access the show notes of today's show, please visit my website, storiesofhopepodcast.com. There you will find a summary of today's show, the transcript, and one of my favorite takeaways. If someone kept coming to mind during today's episode, perhaps that means that you should share this episode with them. Maybe there was a story shared, or a quote, or a scripture verse that they really, really need to hear. So go ahead and share this podcast. May God bless you, especially if you are struggling, with hope to carry on and with the strength to keep going when things get tough. Remember to walk with Christ, and He will help you bear the burden. And above all else, remember, God loves you.